BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNid88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And welcome to BBOR, the home of true crime talk radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and I am your host, as well as the creator of AstroPsych 400 here on YouTube, and regular contributor to the Zodiac Killer channel. And a great way to support these shows is just by listening to some more content. But you can also go over to Amazon.com and have a look at the book Killer on a White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan. It is a novel, murder mystery, inspired by the Zodiac Manson connection, but it is indeed fictional. However, who doesn't love a good mystery? And there is always the TeeSpring page. Feel free to check out some of the merchandise. And remember, being weird is not a crime. Let the show begin. Alright, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, and on Wednesdays this year I've been doing a regular segment about Jack the Ripper. And just a couple of quick announcements and reminders before we begin. The first is that there will be a regularly scheduled episode on the weekend about the murder of Jean-Benet Ramsey coming out either this Saturday night, but more likely into the early AM hours on Sunday. And thank you to everyone who followed last week's Zodiac Monday episode. Every Monday is, of course, Zodiac Monday, talking about the Zodiac Killer. And I also would like to welcome any viewers that have joined in from the link that was posted on part 1 of the discussion that I did last week, and some people might just be listening regularly as these episodes come out live. But last week on the channel I was talking about the Jack the Ripper suspect Louis Diemschutz, and a theorist named Randy Williams, who is the author of Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, who talks about how Louis Diemschutz could have been either Jack the Ripper or the person responsible for orchestrating the Whitechapel murders. Jack the Ripper was a serial killer, and a spree killer nonetheless, who operated in 1888, and the first Ripper crime occurred on August 31st of 1888 with the murder of Polly Nichols, and then the final crime occurred on November 9th with the murder of Mary Kelly. In between, on September 8th, there was the murder of Annie Chapman, and on September 30th there was the double event, which saw the murders of Elizabeth Stride and Kate Eddowes. So, some people think that just that's it. Those 5 murders were committed by the same person, and other people think that there is a very large group of murders that were committed in Whitechapel. And just to name a few of them, the murder of Emma Smith, the murder of Martha Tabram, and the murder of Rose Mylett. Those are just the first 3 that I want to share off the top of my head. But they thought that there was a larger set of homicides attributed to a killer or killers using the name Jack the Ripper. But from the title of this episode, I wanted to make it very clear that this is also continuing from last week's episode when I was talking about Louis Diemschutz as a Jack the Ripper suspect. But there was a lot of info that Randy Williams had shared that I needed to digest for myself, and I needed to understand what he was saying, because he was talking about some very technical things that I wasn't truly familiar with. And that is that, is it possible that the Whitechapel murders were orchestrated by Russian anarchists in a plan to change modern culture, to alter the way that people think? And at first, it sounds like something that is just poppycock or ridiculousness, but then, based on how well composed his presentation was, I think that it deserves at least a fair piece of consideration and a balanced take on the subject. Firstly, you have to begin with the third Ripper crime, the murder of Liz Stride, to understand his theory, and that is that there's a witness in the Ripper case named Louis Diemschutz who may have interrupted Jack the Ripper when he was committing the third murder and forced the Ripper to hide and then flee the scene before Liz Stride was mutilated. And that's why some people don't even believe that Liz Stride was a true Ripper victim, and that the victims, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Kate Eddowes, and Mary Kelly were mutilated because they were actually killed by a different killer. I mean, that exists in some people's theories. But the theory that is put forward by Randy Williams is firstly involving multiple participants. Louis Diemschutz would have been an active participant in the murder of Liz Stride, but again, the crime was interrupted and she was not mutilated. But the other two major participants in his theory are named Isaac Kozabradsky and Samuel Friedman. But the plan was that there was supposed to have been a murder taking place with Elizabeth Stride's death, and then someone was supposed to go to Mitre Square to murder Catherine Eddowes, or maybe even another woman, maybe even the victim wasn't pre-chosen, but just to murder a prostitute, because they were Russian anarchists, and they were followers of the Russian anarchist Peter Kropotkin, the prince who gave up his life to be an anarchist, so some people call him. And that stuff I talked about last week. However, I didn't exactly provide an explanation as to how, and that could possibly change modern culture, and why they would be opposed to prostitution, because I'm sure some of you are even familiar with what anarchists have said on the internet about it's your life, it's your body, you can do whatever you want with it. But when I was watching a presentation from Randy Williams here on YouTube, he said that, number one, that they viewed prostitution as something that was one of the highest offenses to the form of freedom. And not exactly going from the writings of Peter Kropotkin, but from other people who have talked about this in the past that I've encountered in various parts of the internet. As I understand it, they propose that prostitution only exists because of financial oppression, and that people cannot truly be free if these types of financially oppressive systems are in place. So they need to be removed. Now, to get to the actual theory that women, prostitutes, sex workers in England were murdered in very heinous ways, not only murdered, but also mutilated in very heinous and borderline savage ways, in savage ways, to draw the world's attention to not only the crimes but also the mutilations because they were prostitutes, to just scare the world when it came to the concept of prostitution, particularly with the murder of Mary Kelly. That was meant to have been either somewhat of a finale or a very vicious crime to just absolutely make prostitution look like something that was horrible. Again, committing a series of crimes to persuade and to project this idea that prostitution was bad. Thus, there could actually be a freer society in the future. Now, some of you might be listening to that, and you're thinking, yeah, but, I mean, anarchists are all about freedom, right? And anarchists are all about, well, not invading other people's freedom and not invading other people's lives, that you have the right to live in a certain way unless you are violating the freedoms of another person. And yes, all of that would have been true. Again, not going from Kropotkin, but from other sources. It's the concept of committing a necessary evil to lead toward a greater good. It's the means to an end. It's doing something bad now so that goodness can come later on. And do I agree with that? No, absolutely not. I mean, I want to be very clear. If that committing murders to justify someone's political agenda, I mean, personally, I don't support any of that thinking, but there are people in the world who do. And there's a particular reason, though, why Randy Williams believes that the murders attributed to Jack the Ripper were done to influence and affect modern culture, and it goes so far beyond the concept of prostitution. That is just one issue. And this is the stuff that I truly had to understand more and read up on more. And what he was talking about, and even appears on the channel Jack the Ripper Tour, when he shares this information. He also has a Facebook page, which I was reading from last week, about his book Sherlock Holmes and the Autumn of Terror, and it is that the Ripper crimes and the Whitechapel murders took place on Theotokos nights. And I had no idea what this term Theotokos meant. I am not a Christian, and as I've gathered from listening to him on YouTube as well as reading some of his stuff, it's that the Ripper crimes would have also been committed to draw attention to Christianity as well as, yes, Christianity, sects of Christianity, particularly Catholicism and the Orthodox churches, the Russian Orthodox most notably, and that these Theotokos nights are sacred days in the Orthodox Church. And as far as Catholic influences, the one that I shared last week was Catherine Eddowes was murdered in Mitre Square, and mitre is the name of the hat that is worn by the Pope. And yes, there are reasons why this would have taken place, but I had no idea what these things Theotokos nights were, and that how the victims were murdered on Theotokos nights. So I had to just go online and read up on the Great Feasts from Wikipedia. The Great Feasts, or the major feasts of the Orthodox Church, are major celebrations throughout the liturgical year, while various saints and events are celebrated with significance on the local level. The entire Church celebrates together 13 feasts, above all else Pascha and the 12 Great Feasts. Pascha is the feast of the resurrection of Jesus, also called Easter, and is the greatest of the feasts of the Orthodox Church. It is not counted among the 12 major feasts of the Church, since it is considered by itself as the Feast of Feasts. It is celebrated on the first Sunday after the Paschal full moon. Now, the 12 great feasts, this is actually going to tie into some of the dates of Jack the Ripper. There are other days of great importance in the life of the Church, the 12 great feasts, which commemorate and present us again the historic presence of the major events in the lives of Jesus and his Holy Mother. 7 great feasts in honor of Jesus and 5 great feasts honoring the Theotokos constitute the 12 great feasts. September 8th is the Nativity of the Theotokos. This again is some new stuff for me. Theotokos is a single word which sums up the meaning of Luke's phrase, Mother of the Lord, and represents counterpoint to the teaching that the Word was made from flesh. Usually the term is translated as Mother of God. So that is what it means when I'm going to be reading off the word Theotokos. But September 8th, the Nativity of the Theotokos. September 14th, the Elevation of the Holy Cross. November 21st, the presentation of the Theotokos. December 28th, the Nativity of Christ, also known as Christmas. January 6th, Theophany, the Baptism of Christ. February 2nd, the Presentation of Christ. March 25th, the Annunciation. The Sunday before Pascha is Palm Sunday. 40 days after Pascha is the Ascension of Christ. 50 days after Pascha is Pentecost. August 6th is Transfiguration. And August 15th is the Dormition, or the falling asleep of the Theotokos. So there are 12 feasts plus Pascha in the Russian Orthodox Church. And the suspects in question, I'm sure you can already tell from their last names, were not Christians, they were not Catholic, they were not Russian Orthodox, they were Jews. And before I say anything further, I've already banned one person for leaving anti-Semitic comments in the section down below. While I openly encourage you guys to share your true crime theories, if anybody is going to take the Ripper story or any other video on this channel and use it as some excuse to share things about hating the Jews or hating people of any particular origin, that is not welcome here, and you will be immediately banned, blocked, and not welcome in any single way. I just want to make that clear. But there are reasons why there are Jewish suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, as laid out very clearly by Randy Williams. It has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It's that there are this group of Russian anarchists who are Jewish, and it's about making a mockery of Catholicism, the Russian Orthodox Church, the Pope, and there is significance to why the crimes took place and why they happened the way they did. For example, the murder of Annie Chapman took place on September 8th, the nativity of the Theotokos. And as I was reading through this list, though, for the first time, I was like, what on earth is he talking about? Okay, that's one crime, September 8th of 1888, a Theotokos night. But what about all the other crimes? What about August 31st? What about September 30th? What about November 9th? Those do not appear on this list, and I decided to read up a little bit more, particularly on the double event. As we said, that's what implicates Louis Diemschutz as not only, I guess, a Ripper suspect, but also the orchestrator of multiple Ripper crimes or Whitechapel murders. But I decided to go over to St. Tickham's Orthodox Theological Seminary website, being very clear, a website that is not devoted to Jack the Ripper, but just talking about the Theotokos nights. On the evening of September 30th and the morning of October 1st, a seminary and monastic communities gathered for the vigil and divine liturgy to celebrate the feast of the protection of the most holy Theotokos. So that'd be September 30th. Again, another date of significance. Even though it's not one of these 12 feasts, I give credit to Randy Williams. It does appear that seems to all line up. Feast of the Protection of the Most Holy Theotokos. The protection of the Most Holy Theotokos. Today the Virgin stands in the midst of the church with the choirs of saints, and she invisibly prays to God for us. Angels and bishops venerate her. Apostles and prophets rejoice together. Sing for our sake, she prays to the eternal God. And once again, September 30th, in the Orthodox Church, is the Feast of the Protection of the Most Holy Theotokos. So it's not on that 12th, on the list of those 12, but it is a date of significance. Now, what do we make of this? What do we make of this particular theory? Russian Jewish anarchists are trying to destroy organized religion, or even if not organized religion, Catholicism, the Russian Orthodox Church, Christianity, as well as prostitution, because they're all contrary to an anarchist cause. I mean, I don't have too much of a comment on that, as sad as it is, because I think there is something that is so much more important, that is of a greater importance, and that is how these multiple killers theories are arranged. Because Randy Williams doesn't only accuse these Russian anarchists, and of course, they're in England, but these anarchists of Russian heritage in England, of committing the 5 canonical Ripper crimes. As I said, there are other ones, and I listed off the murders of Emma Smith, Martha Tabram, Rose Mylett, and talking about all of these issues on how there were multiple killers, but there was a single mind that is the origin of this, and there's a chain of command, and then you have Peter Kropotkin at the top, and then you have Louis Diemschutz acting as some type of manager of the killings, as morbid as that sounds, and then you have people like Isaac Kosabrodsky carrying out the crimes, or Samuel Friedman, like carrying out activities involved with the crimes and possibly the murder of Catherine Eddowes. So, what do you make of that? I have seen this narrative time and time again on how somebody is just looking at a set of homicides and just attributing the roles of different actions in that set of homicides to different people, and it turns into a theory that you cannot debunk, you cannot disprove, and you cannot investigate, because it always falls back on the explanation that, oh, well, there was an additional participant that we haven't discovered yet. And then when you're faced with contradictory evidence, well, there's no possible way that Louis Diemschutz could have been Jack the Ripper, because he was talking to police officers at the time of the murder of Catherine Eddowes. Liz Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered on the same night, and it's possible that Catherine Eddowes got in contact with her killer 15 minutes after the murder of Liz Stride, or the fact that the killer is getting away. So that couldn't have been Louis Diemschutz. Ah, well, that was his associate who went to Mitre Square and committed the murder. And that's just the beginning of it, because then let's look at the murder of Rose Mylett, which I have an episode about here on Black Box Online Radio. And of course, I invite everybody to like, subscribe, hit the like button if you want to follow along with not only the Ripper Wednesday show, but also any of the other true crime discussions, including the Anything Goes Friday segment, but I have an episode about the murder of Rose Mylett, and the immediate reason why I thought that she was not killed by Jack the Ripper was there was even a point when they thought that Rose Mylett was not even murdered, that she died of natural causes. Her body was so undisturbed that it wasn't blatantly obvious that she was murdered. But yes, they do believe that Rose Mylett was murdered by strangulation with some type of string-like cord that would have been tied around her neck. And I do indeed believe that she was murdered. But think about that. All the reasons why I think she was not murdered by Jack the Ripper, no mutilations, no throat slashing, like with the Ripper victims, particularly Liz Stride, no strangulation which leads to a greater set of bodily harm, even post-mortem harm, to the victims. And I have always said that I think that Jack the Ripper was about mutilating the victims, not even killing them. I mean, as evidenced by the Ripper's own writings in the Saucy Jackie postcard. The first one squealed a bit, meaning Liz Stride, so he had to go find another victim, Catherine Eddowes, and that's why it's called the double event. But let's say all the reasons why I think that Rose Mylett was not murdered by the Ripper, well, with somebody like Randy Williams and his Autumn of Terror theory, it doesn't matter because you could just say, oh well, it's a group of people, and the reason why there are all these differences in the crimes is it's a different person every time, and the reason why there are differences in Jack the Ripper's writings are because they were different people. I mean, it's all orchestrated by the same group of people, but they're just different people all the same. And he says that very clearly about the letters, particularly that the text of the letters would have been dictated by Louis Diemschutz, but it would have been written by different people. The Dear Boss letter, the Saucy Jackie postcard, the From Hell letter, and the McCarthy letter, which I confess, as a newcomer to the Ripper case, I'm not very familiar with, and I'm going to have to look into that in the near future. But that's just the explanation for the differences between the Dear Boss letter and the From Hell letter. Different handwriting, different word choice, different actions. I mean, the Ripper said that he was trying to write in blood for the Dear Boss letter, but it turned thick like glue, so red ink would have to do. And the From Hell letter was mailed with half of a kidney preserved in some type of alcoholic solution. So that just it's something that is very tempting. I mean, I have done this firsthand with countless true crime cases, and I get curious about it. And I mean, I think that these observations on how Jack the Ripper's crimes could have actually been to make a mockery of the church, like just the concept of Christianity, period. Well, there might be some merit to that when you're looking at how these dates had significance in the Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, they're let's investigate that further. I'm not going to endorse that theory based on finding a couple of dates that seem to match up with some type of feasts and festivities that I had never even heard of until 8 days ago. But I'm going to definitely give that some consideration. But the concept of just attributing the roles in the case to multiple killers is too convenient to be true all the time. I mean, I've explored these possibilities in the Zodiac Killer mystery, in the Phantom Killer mystery, in the Long Island Serial Killer mystery, and it often turns out into some type of Occam's razor issue where it's actually simpler to have a smaller amount of perpetrators than a larger one. And you'll see that people will often use this as a way to justify the narrative which they have created for themselves. I mean, and no disrespect to Randy Williams, he could be completely right about everything. He knows exponentially more about the Ripper case than I do. I'm a newcomer, as I said, and definitely a newcomer to all of these theological terms. But I just have some very, very strong, immediate skeptical concerns about this whole thing about it's a plot that was orchestrated by Russian anarchists to change modern culture. I mean, could be correct, but It could also have just been a homicidal maniac who wanted to cut up women because he was a deranged sicko who hated his mother. I mean, things like that also happen. To recap some of the info, in case you didn't hear last week's episode, some points why he thinks that Louis Diemschutz was a very active participant in the Ripper crimes were: number one, he was allegedly driving or riding a horse and cart, also referred to as a horse and buggy, past the scene of the murder of Liz Stride, and that the horse was bothered by either the scent of blood or recognizing that a dead body was present, and he states that he owns a horse farm, or runs a horse farm rather. That is absolutely contrary to horse behavior, let alone that there would have been meat markets and even meat vendors that sold horse meat in 1888 in England, and a horse that regularly walks throughout the city should not have been bothered by the scent of blood. And even if the horse was, a horse does not shy away from that based on his own personal experience, but also drawing concerns about how the story that Louis Diemschutz is the one who is interrupting the Ripper's activities would not be correct, because the Ripper could have been witnessed by somebody else named Israel Schwartz that night, and there was no sighting from Israel Schwartz of a horse and cart or horse and buggy that was present. And the other one is that that Louis Diemschutz had a full beard when he was talking to the investigators after the murder of Liz Stride. But then shortly after that, I mean, when he appeared for a police inquest, his portrait was drawn by a sketch artist for the police that drew him without the beard, and that he had shaved his beard to alter his appearance. So so witnesses possibly in the area would not have seen him. And, I mean, those are some things that I think draw a suspicion, but I'm going to have some reservations about this particular theory, and I think I've shared why. And, I mean, it's rather articulate at face value. I mean, this whole thing about how Russian anarchists are trying to affect modern culture by doing something very vicious to prostitutes because they're opposed to prostitution, they're opposed to the churches, and that they think that those are against the anarchist world that they want to live in. But is that really what happened? I mean, that sounds like something fitting of a novel. But on that note, I mean, that you can read the book for yourself, Sherlock Holmes in the Autumn of Terror by Randy Williams. But the book about Jack the Ripper that I truly want to read is actually in 2 volumes, and it is The Seduction of Mary Kelly, because I've talked about some of the Ripper victims on this channel, and more so than others, and the 3 victims that I've talked about the most have been Polly Nichols, Liz Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, as I referenced 2 of them very much in this episode. But Mary Kelly ended up with the most horrific fate, and I really haven't explored her story too much. And The Seduction of Mary Kelly is a novel, I mean, but I do think that that is just something that I want to explore, because it's just the whole concept of trying to connect with somebody who met a very heinous and tragic fate, someone who met a very vicious and unnecessary end, and you just want to have some type of connection to that person. And I think that's why a lot of us explore these types of true crime cases. But I can even throw that out as a concluding challenge question. Is there any particular Jack the Ripper book that you recommend, or is there one that you would like to read yourself, or is there something that is on your list about Jack the Ripper? And please share your ideas in the comment section down below. And this episode was intended to have been a part 2, a follow-up. Yes, some of the same information was shared more than once, but I mean, it's part of an ongoing discussion, and I really wanted to do an episode that would expand upon this concept of the Theotokos Nights, because, I mean, this was something that, I mean, I just had to at first comprehend for myself before I could truly talk about this particular true crime theory. But please share anything you want in the comment section down below. I would love to read your messages. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. And there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you there for the bonus podcast. Until next time.